Hi, good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Bethany Servin, and I work in marketing here at Usablenet. Today's webinar is Proven Accessibility Strategies for 2025 from Start to Scale. It is part of our Usablenet 25th anniversary series, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to our speakers for introductions, starting with Michele.
Thank you, Bethany, and hi, everyone. My name is Michele Lucchini. I'm the Vice President for Products. I've been at Usablenet for about 25 years, and my role in Usablenet is to oversee the strategic product development, making sure that we ensure that our services and technologies, and therefore the solutions, are fitting with our clients' needs and are meaningful in the market and our clients' ecosystems. I think I can say that I dedicated almost 20 plus years of my career to digital accessibility. And beside the activities with UsableNet, I'm also the co-author of Content for Everyone, a practical guide for creative entrepreneurs to produce accessible and usable web content together with Jeff. And with that said, I'll hand over to Jeff.
Thanks, Michele. I'm the Vice President of Accessibility Operations here. And while I haven't been here quite as long as Michele has, I've actually been here for half of the time that UsableNet's been around as I approach my 14th year here this fall. One of the many things that I do in my role is I work with our clients who are doing the accessibility work to help them understand how they can embed accessibility into their company culture, into their software development lifecycle, and create sustainable processes to take them forward so that they're thinking about accessibility with everything they do on their digital properties. And I also help lead our development of educational sessions for UsableNet, such as this webinar that we're doing today. And as Michele mentioned, we co-wrote Content for Everyone to help spread the message of accessibility beyond even the work that we do at UsableNet. We'll take a look at today's objectives. What teams can do to scale and sustain accessibility, because that's always one of the primary elements that we have to think about as we start to get into an accessibility program or as we look to grow the accessibility program we already have. What are the common roadblocks around an accessibility program, and how can you work to avoid those in your organization and in your work? And then we'll look at some practical ways to launch, recharge, or mature your efforts, which can be very important, whether you're just starting out or, trying to maintain a program that's been going for several years. So scale and sustainability is one of the key cornerstones of accessibility, and it always has been, and it really formed some of how UsableNet got started. And Michele, you were here from the very beginning, and the origin of UsableNet was working on accessibility and looking to solve some pain for those who were having to do accessibility work. Can you give us a little brief flashback on kind of where we started back in 2000?
Yeah, it was said, Jeff. I was here, and I think that the is essential to set some context because early 2000 was probably pioneering digital accessibility. Um, the the context is necessary because we have to consider that the guideline that we had available, the Web Content Accessibility Guideline in its version 1.0, was lot less elaborated than the existing one. The websites were much more simple than our current website. So the focus that we had and what our clients was looking for were mainly tools. Accessibility at that time meant providing tools to a role that probably doesn't even exist anymore, which is the webmaster. And for that reason, we were producing plugins for the most popular development tool at that time that were Macromedia, Dreamweaver, and Microsoft FrontPage to do some tests against the Web Content Accessibility Guideline 1.0. And identify and address the common issues. Once we solve a specific role, specific activity, pain, uh, immediately after, I would say, was evident that we had to operate on a larger scale. So helping the webmaster, so helping who was meant to implement the site, was probably not enough. It was not providing stakeholders a snapshot of the status of their properties. For this reason, it was suddenly clear that was also require the ability to perform a server-side analysis, so server-side testing tool that was able to process a lot of pages. So again, in the early 2000s, we had a technology that was called lift machine that was testing and processing entire websites and was typically the activities we were doing working with the government sites or universities where you were launching the crawler and you were getting a report of the accessibility status against the Web Content Accessibility Guideline at the standard of those years. And then while the pain was still remaining the same, so quite similar also to the pain that we might face now, right? So accessibility being something not as easy to prioritize, not as easy to implement, we had the intuition to start working on alternatives. In the early 2000s, the alternative version of the site was a quite popular way to address accessibility. Obviously, the optimal solution was always um, uh, making the site natively accessible, but creating an alternative view, an alternative version was considered a viable product, a viable solution. And at that time, the alternative version was a text-only version, so a linearized text-only version of the websites, and we had the technology to do that. And the step that we did right after that was also to add some style, some cosmetic, having a alternative version that was not just a text only, but also was formatted in a way that was nicer and didn't seem like the ugly version of the website. And this was actually the core of our business and the way we supported our clients in the early 2000s. When it comes to understanding the evolution of our services, and I would say even more importantly, the evolution of our clients' needs, because our services and solution has been just a reaction, a consequence of the needs. We can again set more context, right? So from the WCAG 1.0, we moved to the WCAG in the 2008 2.0. There was a more complex guideline, more success criteria to address, more aspects to consider. And we also have to consider the progressive increment of the complexity of our website. That was the time where we were still supporting clients with the previous technology because those solutions were still okay, but the responsive web design was kicking in. So we started getting requests on audits. So WCAG audits, meaning test activities for our clients to remediate the issues that we were identifying during those activities. So while we were doing audits, we felt the need of a platform that was, at one end, helping us delivering the audits in a structured way, into an articulated way, but at the other end, also a platform that was representing something like the hub for our clients to implement their accessibility testing plan, accessibility monitoring plan. And Last but not least, we have also started performing um, accessibility trainings. So we started imp- focusing on training the doers, the ones that were supposed to perform the activities, and the ones that were mainly can fall under the umbrella of the tech teams. So, I'm feeling some background noise. Uh, I don't
I
know,
think it just got
Bethany.
solved.
Okay, thanks. Um, so training the tech team, so mainly developers and testers. And then we also saw a clear need progressively to involve more and more people in our training program. So from training just developers and testers, we started training all departments, including project managers, content creator, customer care, because we suddenly realized that accessibility was a global requirement to address in order to make it sustainable, in order to make to transform it into a program rather than a project. And in terms of alternative solutions, beside the native remediation of the websites, we had we had the technology that we implemented supporting our clients in a dynamic front-end remediation that we were applying uh, to the existing site without creating an alternate solution, and remediation performed by expert developers, so without the use of widgets or automated technologies. And this was the basically the journey, very in a very fast forward fashion, but was let's say in line with the evolution of the technology and the evolution of the guideline that was, and both were determining the new needs, both that were raising the bar for us to support our companies. So, Jeff, maybe you can go in further details and walk us through some specific key takeaways to, to the client, I mean, the companies are following in order to make accessibility a sustainable program.
Absolutely. And the innovations on the UsableNet side that we've looked at here have certainly laid the foundation for the way that we work with many organizations to tackle their accessibility programs. And before we leave the timeline, I think it's good to note here as we're looking at it that if we think about, especially in the US, the increased legal side of things that came about around 2020. Since 2020, each year we've kind of seen this rise of more and more accessibility lawsuits in the US and more demand letters around accessibility in the US, really making it kind of a two-pronged reason why companies really need to embrace the accessibility work because they not only need to serve their customers well, but on the other hand, there is also this, pressure in the US around lawsuits. And now, certainly here in 2025, we're just a couple of weeks away from when the European Accessibility Act is going to kick in, adding a layer of regulatory need in the EU member nations to also take on accessibility. For government agencies, it's the forthcoming Title II regulations that start to kick in 2026 that add even more responsibility around it than some of the previous Title II legislation and regulations that were in place. So we could almost have a whole other timeline about that. But it all goes to show why it's so important to be able to scale and sustain. And all of this UsableNet innovation gives us a number of ways that organizations can approach this. The first would be around the managed service, which connects to that dynamic remediation option that Michele was talking about. With the managed service called UsableNet Assistive, that the majority of the accessibility work can actually be offloaded from organizations, and you have our developers doing the accessibility work, and then it's injected into the DOM of the website. And it's basically, the majority of the work is on us, so it can be more hands off to the organization, so the teams there can focus on other parts of their digital product roadmap. Now, there's still some elements there that the teams would still need to address for accessibility, such as elements that Usablenet Assistive can't remediate, which can be things like the use of images of text, or if there is some code in the site that perhaps isn't up to the correct context to W3C standards. There's reasons we can't handle that necessarily in the managed service. There's also third-party integrations, chat bots, review widgets, cookie privacy banners, email pop-ups to gather emails, those being controlled by other parts of the organization that, we can't affect and probably the organization itself can't impact. But there are things we can do there to help organizations work around those. And then, of course, there's PDFs and multimedia too. And while Usablenet Assistive's managed service can't handle that, there's a lot of consulting that we can do here and pointing you even to other partners to help you manage PDFs and your multimedia, meaning videos and audio and things like that. There's also the other side of this, where you as an organization may choose to bring accessibility fully in-house, and you're going to tackle accessibility with your own internal teams or perhaps vendors that you work with for design or development or QA services or content services. In terms of the fully managed service, then you're continuing to utilize, what Usablenet's innovations have been over the years, with comprehensive audits for your websites, for your apps, for the digital properties. There's testing with members of the disabled community at routine intervals, which is all part of the service that we can provide because we work with members of the disabled community to be available for testing. Then there's routine monitoring and testing with a platform like Usablenet's Aqua, which, which the genesis of Aqua formed from some of those very early things that Michele was talking about. So that you have the opportunity to do automated testing. If your teams have a good accessibility knowledge in-house, you can use it to also check for manual review things that need to be looked at through your testing. It can also monitor the site, so you get these ongoing reports on how your accessibility program is holding up as you continue to innovate the site. Certainly, an accessibility program has to have education so that the teams not only understand the fundamentals of accessibility, but also have a continuing education program in place so that they continue to learn about accessibility, hear new ways that people might be testing things or, approaching ways to remediate. There's so much good education out there. And then you also want to get accessibility included in your software development lifecycle so that it's part of your process. Because one of the key elements in being able to scale and sustain is that it's not something that you're dealing with on a reactive basis, like when you get an audit or when you get a complaint or when you get user testing information in. It's something that's baked into the very process itself. So it's always part of your definition of done throughout the software development lifecycle. So you're becoming proactive about accessibility. Now, there's also some hybrid options that can sit in there as well when you're working with an organization that has a fully managed service like Usablenet. And it's important to note that that's not, any kind of a widget or something that's dealing with things only through automation. The managed service is having, actual experienced developers do that work. But then our team on that managed service could work alongside your internal accessibility program as well. It could be that you use, excuse me, the fully managed service as a bridge to your internal accessibility program. So you use our service to get spun up relatively quickly, provide the service while your teams are doing the work so that the native website is able to become under their own control and under their own processes to be accessible. And then over time, usually over a course of about 18 months to 2 years, you come off the managed service and your teams are fully now handling the accessibility themselves. There's also the side of it where you may have the internal accessibility program already in place and doing a robust job, getting the site to a certain level, but then you have the fully managed service also in place to do the additional things that your team either doesn't have the time to do, the expertise to do, whatever that might be, so that those two things work together in tandem to then provide the accessibility services and needs that your customers will have to have a good experience on the site. And of course, all this goes beyond just a website too. I mentioned, alongside with the apps, that you do have to think about your mobile applications in this as well. Certainly, many customers interact with mobile apps over the mobile website. So you certainly need to make sure that those are also hitting, the right accessibility levels and that they are substantially accessible for your customers. And again, also, to think about the legal side of things in the US and the regulations around the world. All of the things you bring onto your website, all the multimedia, if you're using videos or audio, if you're linking to PDFs, perhaps for nutritional information, if you're selling food items, for instruction manuals, if you're putting out, maybe some consumer electronics or things like that, or just general information that may come in those PDFs. Those all need to be accessible. And of course, those third-party components I mentioned too. It's important to understand the level of accessibility for any component you're bringing onto the website, whether it's a chat bot, a review widget, whatever it is. Even though you can't necessarily control the code for it, you're also responsibility for it. And we see more and more in claims inside the US that third-party components are called out as being things that are not accessible. But beyond those, you also should be thinking about your email communications, any communications that you're sending to your customers, especially if they're of like the newsletter or promotional variety, to make sure that your customers are able to get all the information out of those. There's any social media posts that you might make. There's, certain ways to make sure all of your media, whether it's audio or video or pictures that are going into those social media posts, are also accessible so that your customers are able to engage with you appropriately within those networks. If you're a store with physical locations and you may have kiosks in your store, or a restaurant that has the devices on the table where you can do payment and even order, all of those also need to be accessible and have all the tools and things built into them to allow for that accessible experience if a customer's in store. So it's beyond thinking about just the website and thinking of these other elements as well. Now, I want to talk briefly about some of the common roadblocks that we have seen over the years and things that you really need to avoid if you can, or if you can't avoid them, at least understand how you can go about overcoming them. So one of the things we still see even today is that occasionally there's no buy-in from leadership or key stakeholders on the accessibility work. And I don't necessarily mean that they're not letting the work actually start to happen. But what we can see from a leadership point of view is even if some budget is allocated and they allow the work to start happening, that maybe that budget gets pulled back, or maybe the time to do the work is, removed over in favor of other things. And this really gets to being able to have the grassroots foundation of accessibility built into the organization, and then be communicating up on the importance of why this is important to the customers, the legal side of all of it, the regulatory side of all of it, to really help leadership and stakeholders understand that this needs more than lip service, that it needs official buy-in, and that it becomes part of what the organization's mission is to provide accessible web content. There's often a lack of education around teams, and this is one of the easier ones to solve. Certainly, Usablenet has a robust education program that we offer to our partners. But there's a lot of good, solid education out there for accessibility through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals and through other organizations who really seek to make this information available so that the digital world can become more accessible. Relying only on the automated scans. We see this a lot as well. Organizations saying that they're just going to pay attention to what is coming through those automated scans. And that is such a smaller percentage of what is in the web content accessibility guidelines. There's roughly 18 to 20 success criteria within the 55 at WCAG 2.2 that can be detected in some fashion through automation. And then it's only a portion of those success criteria. So you're leaving so much on the table and so much that can cause a blocker for your customers if you're only relying on automation. Now, don't get me wrong, automation can be a great place to start, but you quickly have to have the idea in mind on how you're going to expand beyond just automation. Also, there's looking for the silver bullet rather than actually doing the necessary work and engaging, in whatever way you need to scale up and have that accessibility work happening in the organization. And silver bullets can be anything from relying on a widget that is only relying on automation to make changes to your website, trying to rely only on the automated scan. It could be trying to rely on AI to produce accessible code for you. That may be more possible one day, but we're certainly not sitting there, where we are today in June of 2025, that's a possibility. It could also be one of the things that I've heard recently is only approaching accessibility towards new development instead of fixing the site overall. Because if you're only focusing on new development, you may have a large portion of the website that is otherwise inaccessible that people couldn't even get to that new development part. So it's really about doing the work that's necessary to make this work inside your organization and for your customers. And then there's expecting that the work will go quickly or ever have an endpoint. As people begin the journey, I mean, to get to a good baseline of accessibility, which we would consider no automated issues and none of the high severity issues that would be a blocker for somebody, that could take easily a month, or not a month, 12 months to 18 months to get to a good place. And then you have to be able to continue to maintain that and work it into everything you do. So this is neither a quick nor an endpoint. So it's important to kind of prepare the internal leadership, the internal stakeholders, and everybody working on the team that this is just a part of the work that has to be done. Much like, website security, also something that never goes away. It's continuing ongoing work. And then there's assuming that accessibility is only a development issue. Accessibility at the end of the day really is a responsibility of everyone, which is why we advocate for the development of accessibility policies that very clearly lay out for the individual teams what their responsibilities are, whether they're in design, whether they're in content development, if they're in the site or the app development team, or if they're in the QA team. Even for the marketing and for some of the other ancillary teams, they all need to know exactly what their responsibilities are so that they're upholding that, because everything can't just be a development issue. You can imagine, for example, if there's color contrast issues, the design team needs to decide what the new color is, not the development team, and so on. So it's important to be able to pick that kind of material up.
Yeah, I think that Jeff, your last point was probably the key to do another analysis of the genesis of our services and our solution as a response to the client needs. Uh, to be honest, I had almost like an emotional moment looking backwards to everything we did and now in particular, our training mm, curricula evolved over time and improved over time. That to me represents a good meter to the evolution of the needs client side. Often, I would say needs that the client were not even able to identify, but we had them feeling those. And in particular, we had them realizing that they had that need and the resolving it could have been very functional, beneficial to achieving the overall success um, in their accessibility program. Like I was mentioning before, the early ages of our training proposition, our training offer, was main focus, full steam ahead on tech teams only. There were good reasons to do that. Technology, like I said before, was more simple. The guideline was more simple. And the amount of people regulating the delivery life cycle, the development life cycle around the digital property was kind of not as rich as it is right now. So the intuition that actually there were more people involved that now seems trivial, but was something that we matured over time. And I think that the biggest milestone that we achieved after realizing the importance of training the design team in that sort of shift left mentality, I think that the biggest milestone is the intuition of training teams that we didn't think initially that they were fundamental in the accessibility journey. And I'm talking about project managers. So the project managers train on accessibility that start understanding which are the final customer pains in case the site is not accessible, understanding how to prioritize, understanding how to create a strategy around the accessibility remediation and how to combine the accessibility efforts with the remaining pipeline and streams that obviously a company has was the key. I think was the key of success for many organizations we have worked with. And it was immediately evident that the gap before we start applying this training practice was the providing companies tools to understand how to prioritize, understand how to distribute all the issues that maybe we were finding with an audit, but were just stuck in a report and nobody was actually actioning it, or the action was sending the report to a developer that had to go through thousands of issues and maybe start distributing across the team. And that was far from being an efficient way to address it. So introducing the trainings for management, for stakeholders to better understand the need, providing tools to understand the progress, also providing tools to celebrate on accessibility, tools uh, to understand the value of the work that the team was doing, understanding the importance of increasing the customer base and the magnitude of the customer base. So everything finalized to one specific aspect, making sure that everybody understands that accessibility becomes sustainable only when everybody plays a role with it. And that was a key achievement for many companies that we have worked with. I could not call it a silver bullet, but I think that was an important milestone to achieve. That understanding was the first step into accessibility maturity. And this matches with the other aspect that you also touch as a common denominator of many comments that you made on these slides before. A lot is a matter of process. Yes, actions. Yes, expertise. Yes, readiness to address accessibility related aspects. But what you really need is a process that helps you treating accessibility as a requirement. A process includes the creation of a policy, so everybody understands their role, everybody understands the company goals and company requirements and timelines, and including accessibility as part of every step into the software development lifecycle, and making very clear who is responsible for what at every stage are the key aspects to achieve this sustainability and stop perceiving accessibility as an accessory or even worse, as a cost for your organization.
So I want to talk a little bit about what it means to, try to launch your programs, to recharge them, and even to mature them a little bit more as you take this accessibility journey on your digital products. And the first one, and Michele, talked a little bit about this on those last couple of slides, and being able to celebrate accessibility successes. This is so important, I think, because it's so easy to get bogged down in having, potentially thousands of issues on audit reports come back, or even, noticing that things are coming back and, recurring after you've remediated something. So it's really important to celebrate the success that you've had. And I would recommend even making it a little more than, hey team, we've taken care of, 30 accessibility bugs in the last sprint, which on its own is really good. But then try to tie back to that what that means to the customer. That you solved color contrast issues, which mean it's going to be easier for people to read the content on the page. That you took care of a keyboard trap that was keeping people trapped inside the top navigation if they were navigating with keyboards. That the content team, revamped the alternative text on dozens of pages to make sure that the text was meaningful or that it was removed for images that were only decorative. Tie that back to how it helps your customer, and that can help those successes resonate even more than just a number of bugs that were fixed. At the same time that you're considering legal risk and the number of WCAG violations, focus your program overall on working toward the site or the app or the communications being available for everyone. All of the sites always want to make sure they're being as workable for their audience as possible. Nobody wants a site that they know people can't come to and accomplish their goal in a quick fashion. And that's definitely, something that the accessibility work leans into is getting people onto the site, letting them find their product, find the information that they need quickly and efficiently, and be able to complete their task. And tying your accessibility work into the usability work can help, get the buy-in from leadership, can get the buy-in from teams on why that work is important so that the site itself can be successful with every audience group that's trying to interact with it. In these days where there's so much economic, difficulty out in the world, it's important to ensure that there is budget that continues to be available to do the accessibility work, because the regulations and the legal landscape in the US aren't going to change because the budget is no longer available for it. So it's one of those areas where you've really got to take the steps to make sure that the budget is there from a monetary standpoint, but also from a resource standpoint, that the accessibility work can continue to be made a priority. And then, as we talked about, if we're looking at long-term sustainability, it's about making accessibility and usability core value to the organization, which is key to getting that management buy-in as well. And then that brings it beyond just what individual teams might be doing. We've seen a few times where accessibility can maybe start in the design team of an organization, but then nobody's telling the development team that they have to do what the design team is necessarily saying, or the changes that the design team is trying to install into the organization. So making sure that it does go across all the teams so that they very clearly understand the role that they're playing and what's expected of them is important, which is where that accessibility policy can definitely come in and play a part. Whether you want to call it a policy and give it the weight of the terminology of policy, or even call it a strategy, making sure everybody knows what they have to do is key to helping make sure that that happens. But then you also have to have the accountability behind that policy so that there is, some form of a consequence if people aren't actually doing the work that they're charged to do with. And then really important, there's treating any future audits that you get as an opportunity for additional learnings, what maybe didn't work inside your processes to prevent issues from cropping up on future audits. In most of the audits, there's always going to be some aspect of stuff that you didn't fix from one to the other that may continue to be there on the second one. But if something comes up in subsequent audits that you're not sure how it manifested, it's an interesting opportunity to do a little bit of a postmortem and a little bit of a study on that to understand why something did not uh, why something cropped up there when the team should have been able to not cause that issue in the first place. So having that continuous learning, even with inside the team, is important. And there's actually another one that I want to throw in here as we're looking at this in terms of scaling up and having that sustainability is really understanding how you're working with vendors. We had a question pop in about, is there any kind of list of recommended web developers out there? And that is, certainly something that the industry as a whole is having to deal with because we see all too often in the work that we do that vendors or even, who might be working on design or development or helping you design content or doing QA for you, or even individuals that you might hire, then you get into a situation of, how do you prove their accessibility knowledge and that they're going to be able to meet the demands that you have. This is a great part too, that your accessibility policy could come into play because your policy will clearly outline the expectations that you have around accessibility. And that becomes something you could share with a vendor, that you could share with a new hire, that you could share with, those outside and inside the organization to make sure that you are going to get what you need from those individuals. If you're hiring somebody and they don't live up to that, then you have the option to figure out if you're going to let them go or train them up. If you're working with a vendor, it should absolutely be spelled clearly out in your contracts what the accessibility expectations are and how that vendor is going to meet them to make sure that you're going to get the work that you need from them and that the work that they give you doesn't potentially open you up to a poor customer experience or perhaps a legal issue as well. And now, as we kind of get in here to the end of our presentation, I'm going to hand it back off to you, Mick, and I'm curious what you see as, what the future has in store for us in terms of accessibility, not just as we go through the rest of 2025, but, perhaps a little beyond that as well.
Yeah, I think that the most natural answer is to include artificial intelligence. I think that the view that we have built in Usablenet around artificial intelligence is that it is definitely part of the equation. We use it quite a lot, but the way we are benefiting from the artificial intelligence is constantly at the expert service. So at the state of art, based on the uh, concrete training abilities and how we can have a machine learning relevant stuff. The volume of data the Usablenet can produce is probably not as big enough, or Usablenet or any other accessibility expert. So while there are aspects that are already mature, such as the image recognition, they might not apply very well to accessibility. So the fact that you should not rely in an automated way without validating it to what the AI can generate is one of the aspects that we believe is a fundamental, let's say, uh, consideration in the way you will leverage it at your end. So we like to believe that AI will make a competent accessibility professionalism a way more efficient, but will never make it competent, will never replace it. So really, the biggest opportunity around the artificial intelligence that we can see is in the new ways of browsing. I believe that it could be tomorrow, it could be the day after tomorrow, it could be in few years, but probably there will be an evolution in the way we'll be interacting with the web. Uh, and depends on the use case, I easily see how to accomplish a specific need, like book a flight or book an hotel room or buy a recurring products I need. For me, uh, as an activity that we could simply ask artificial assistance to do for us with some parameters. Um, Different story in case we want to just have the experience of browsing the web, like browsing a museum website or some art, or even a retailer site that we want just to browse and see the products. That is probably matching with the experience that we have right now. But in terms of specific task, I believe that artificial intelligence will definitely create probably a quite drastic change in the way also the assistive technologies that people with disabilities may use will interact with. So I think that this could be the evolution we'll have in front of us in the following in the near or midterm future.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that from the AI perspective. We've already seen tools like OpenAI's Operator, which, while far from perfect, starts to give us the idea that you can do a simple text prompt and it goes off to do what you've asked it to do. And as those continue to evolve more and more, and I think, even now, like Chrome has Gemini built right into it, so you can ask Gemini about what's on the screen on your web browser. As long as those things happen to be accessible also, so we have to hope that all these new technologies are being developed in a way that, whether it's an AI, app itself or how these things get built into the browsers, hopefully they will be accessible as they're built out. Yeah, I think the future is interesting to be sure. So we have a few minutes, got about 5 or 6 minutes that we could do some questions. I was thinking as we were going through this, Michele, that I've been here almost 14 years and just kind of thinking about the evolution of the organizations that we work with around accessibility and some of the things that I've seen over the years of being really great evolutions. For me, it's been the number of organizations who do, in fact, go from ones who are reluctant and only wanting to do this because they're kind of forced into it, either for regulations or maybe they got a claim or somebody in the organization says you must do this, to ones who really do set up these sustainable organizations where they're going through the routine of thinking about accessibility within each release and doing the audits every year and getting their user testing done and taking the opportunity to really embrace that work and then maybe also use a managed service to bridge those gaps and things like that. It's been great to see, especially within the last 5 years, how some of that has really started to evolve and take hold. I'm curious, and I know I'm springing this on you at the last second, but do you have something that like sticks out in your mind from the years of the work that we've done to really, that you've seen that has been really like a great moment that you've seen?
Yeah, I think that one evidence of what you just said was uh, the driving force that was letting companies focusing on accessibility. I think that looking back few years, the legal threat was the main driving force, and the majority of the companies were coming to us saying, "I I need to do it because my legal team asked. I need to do it because I receive a claim." I think that that's less and less the single driving force right now. I think that in particular in the US market, we see the let's say ethical aspect and the reputation and the consistency with other company statement and messages or narrative being a much stronger driving force. And I think that this is also matching with the uh, with the evolution we are seeing in Europe, the legal threat in Europe is kind of a new thing. The European Accessibility Act is kicking in a couple of weeks, and we are seeing how that still in Europe represents for some company an important motivation to do accessibility. But I think it's just a matter of that requirements being very young in the European culture and the legal aspect being a solid threat, so something that scares quite a lot. In the US, like I said, I saw progressively more and more maturity in understanding the business case around accessibility, understanding the impact on reputation, and also the impact on the quality of the solution for everyone.
Hmm. I do want to answer one quick question before we go. I see Bethany's popped back in here. Um, the question is, can you talk about best practices for reviewing accessibility conformance reports for applications we're considering purchasing and those already in our environment? Do you assess internally, pay a professional to assess, or are there AI tools available to assess? This person says they have hundreds of ACRs to assess. Uh, you could certainly go either way. Like if you've got the time or the experience that you feel comfortable assessing them, you can. We have a number of organizations we work with who have us assess maybe their ACRs on their third-party components or have us actually audit those third-party components, either that are already present or in some cases that they're considering purchasing just to validate the fact that those ACRs that they get are actually accurate. I would also say, in terms of, I think AI can be very powerful if you like feed them all of your ACRs that are in a category. Let's say you're reviewing chatbots in one instance that you're thinking about purchasing. Put all those ACRs into something like ChatGPT and say, here, I have all these ACR reports. Can you review these and tell me which of these are appear to be the most accessible? And then it's going to give you that list, and maybe that helps winnow down the number of things you're at least looking at. It's not going to make the choice for you, and I wouldn't ask it to make that choice, but it might help you winnow the information down into something that's more practical to be able to action for you. Is there anything you'd add to that, Mick?
No, I think you were spot on, Jeff. Yeah, nothing to add on it.
Well, I mean, we only have 1 minute left, so I did want to just quickly say thank you, Jeff and Michele, for sharing your expertise today. So thank you again, everyone. And we are at the hour. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude today's webinar.